This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon. Welcome to today's CEW Connect event, Beyond COP26, Combining Corporate Responsibility and Purpose. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which CEW members live, work, and from where we are all meeting today, in my case, the lands of the Kulin Nations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise their continuing connection to land, water, and community. We acknowledge the strength of Indigenous women leading their communities and extend respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women who are members of the CEW community and to those who are joining us today. I would also like today to send our thoughts and support to the people and especially the women of Ukraine, including, of course, family and friends of members of the CEW community. My name is Deirdre Wilmot, and I am Chair of the CEW Scholarships Committee and a Non-Executive Director of Australia Post. Today's discussion is about ESG, and the number who have registered today underlines the step change that we are seeing in the importance of environment, social and governance issues right across business and government in Australia. As Chair of the People and Sustainability Committee of the Board at Australia Post, I have seen how in the past year, ESG issues, especially in the areas of climate change and waste reduction, have become more and more important, not just for our corporate responsibility programs, but in our commercial strategy. Customers want to know about our carbon footprint, packaging, and that our supply chains are free of modern slavery, so they can advise their customers and fulfill their reporting requirements, including to investors and banks. Many organisations are realising that they need to take a strategic approach to ESG. Boards have a key leadership role in understanding the opportunities and risks that are emerging in a decarbonising world and ensuring whole of organisation engagement in setting and meeting agreed targets and other challenges. Last week, CEW launched Meet the Moment, a report which highlighted the importance of climate change as an issue for women and the need for women's participation and representation at decision-making tables as the Australian economy transitions in response to climate change. CEW's mission is Women Leaders Enabling Women Leaders, and our scholarships program gives us the opportunity to invest in women leaders working in key areas of our economy. CEW is very proud to be partnering with ANZ again in 2022 to offer 2 CEW and ANZ sustainability scholarships to experienced practitioners to develop their leadership skills. Applications are currently open until 28 March. So if you work in this area, I encourage you to consider applying. Today, we're hearing from 2 recognised and highly skilled Australian leaders in ESG, Fiona David and Kate Hart. Leading the conversation will be Fiona, who is Chair of Research at Minderoo Foundation. An international human rights lawyer, Fiona joined Minderoo's Walk Free in 2012. She led the development of the Global Slavery Index, which is now used by companies and governments globally as the accepted measure of modern slavery country by country. Today, her role focuses on emerging challenges, including inequality and global warming. Fiona was a CEW scholar in 2018 and attended MIT's Innovation Across Value Chain in Boston. Kate Hart is a partner of Carney Management Consulting, leading their Australia and New Zealand ESG practice. She is a chemical engineer and also has an MBA. She was a CEW scholar in 2014 when she attended the INSEAD Learning to Lead program in Singapore. Kate has had a very wide-ranging career, which she's going to share with us this afternoon as she talks about what is happening across the sustainability landscape. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, so please pop your questions in the chat for when we reach the Q&A, or feel free to use the hands up button during the Q&A. In the meantime, it would be great if you could remain on or go on mute. Once again, welcome, and I now hand over to Fiona.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, and I'm very excited to see everyone here today. I'm joining you from Ngunnawal land in near Canberra. So, ESG, we're here to talk about this yet another acronym. And it wasn't that long ago that I had to say to one of my colleagues at Fortescue Metals Group, ESG, what does that stand for? And I was blissfully unaware that as a human rights lawyer, I'd actually been working on one element of the E and the S and the G for many, many years, which of course is the social area and the governance area. So I expect everybody on this call today probably has some sort of connection to environmental issues or social issues, labour, whether it's around making their own workplaces safer or investment decisions. You know, we all have a role to play in ESG every day of our lives. So I'm very excited today that we have a practitioner here today, Kate Hart, an expert practitioner who can help us unravel that complex question, not just of why is ESG important, but also how. We've already had some questions to us around, okay, why is nice, but how is even more important.
Yeah.
So Kate, as Deirdre kindly mentioned, you are a chemical engineer.
I am, Fiona.
So I'm a big fan of women in STEM, so I just wanted to make sure we acknowledged your contribution there.
Thank you.
Kate, we had a very interesting conversation last week where we talked about some of your background, and you shared with me a fascinating anecdote about your mother, if that's okay for me to share it.
Yes, that is fine.
Okay, you mentioned that your mum had, you know, you remember having a conversation with your mum and she talked about how she thought occupational therapy would be a great career for you. So how is it that from that starting point, you ended up where you are today as a chemical engineer and now here talking to us about ESG?
Well, yes, so happy to share. Sorry, Mum, if she sees this. But yeah, so my mum was strongly encouraging me to pursue a career that would work well when I had a family. I considered that, but then I was very fortunate to actually attend a science summer school in Canberra, the National Youth Science Forum, which actually used to be sponsored by Rotary and Rio Tinto. It's still there today. I'm not sure who's sponsoring it these days. But for me, that was a sliding doors moment. It was a huge, really a life-changing experience where I went there and it was in beautiful Canberra, like Burley Griffin and all the amazing university and research institutions. And it just highlighted really how fascinating a career in science, in STEM would actually be. And I really enjoyed the business side as well as the science side. I'm, very maths and science focused. So I was able to interact with other people that had gone through the program and sort of saw some of their career paths, and chemical engineering for me was incredibly exciting. So I decided to pursue that. I got a scholarship, and yeah, I wouldn't look back and change any of the decisions I made. So yeah, it's a fascinating career. And it's taken me, I'm not working as a chemical engineer now, but the learning and the training that I received as an engineer, and I worked with ExxonMobil and then BHP for a while, has definitely helped me in great stead.
What have you sort of observed throughout your career, some of the, I guess, the shifts and changes you've noticed as you've gone further up the corporate ladder as a woman with that STEM training, and an engineer no less? What, tell me about your early experiences with ExxonMobil and then maybe how that's changed over time.
Yeah, for sure. So I do count myself very privileged to actually have started my career with ExxonMobil. I think I was a starry-eyed, incredibly enthusiastic, quite passionate engineer working as a process engineer at the Altona refinery, running the alkylation unit. I loved it. And ExxonMobil was actually quite ahead of their time so far as that gender was never actually an issue. even though I was working at the refinery, I never felt there was any obstacles to my career progression, because actually there were senior role models in the business as females holding pretty senior positions. And for me, I could see a very clear pathway. And then, I think I decided I wanted to get into the mining industry. So I went to Western Mining and then BHP, and, great experience, very different organisations there as well. And I think I was still, the importance of senior female role models, being able to see it to believe it, I think was really important. So unfortunately, it wasn't really until I've sort of become senior myself, I see how important that is. And when there is a lack of senior female role models, and there is a lack of senior female role models in professional services, it is a little bit disillusioning to juniors. So I think, I was fortunate in my career. I was able to be blissfully ignorant for a long time. But I think, over the last, particularly after having children, I'm very well aware of the challenges and the way that we still need to go in regards to helping women be successful in the workforce.
That's a wonderful reminder to all of us, because I think it's very easy to forget. Younger women do look up to other women in their workplaces, so it's very, very important reminder. So thank you for that, Kate. So Kate, you eventually found your way to Kearney.
I did.
Yes, so tell us about your role at Kearney.
Yes, so I've been at Kearney coming up to 10 years now. I joined as the first part-time employee as an associate with 3 children, 5 and under. And I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. But it's been an extraordinary privilege, really, working in professional services. I love the work that Kearney does. So, as an engineer, Kearney is, the leader in operations and all things procurement and supply chain. So that's very much my bailiwick. And I get to work with fascinating clients on really challenging problems. And actually, it's a privilege with being able to work with these smart people that come in and join our business. So it is a great career. It definitely keeps me on my toes and keeps me stimulated intellectually, for sure.
So I think many people on this call would already have a very clear idea of why ESG is a critical topic. But do you want to just share your own personal views, Kate, on why what you think the imperative is right now for everybody to be combining purpose? It's no longer enough to just be out there chasing a profit or doing your job as you're told. Talk us through your thoughts on the imperative of ESG.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting you opened up talking about acronyms. I think ESG is an alphabet soup of acronyms. And whether you talk about the legislation or the reporting requirements or all the elements, whether it's the UN Sustainability Development Goals, etc., there is a alphabet soup of acronyms in ESG. But coming back to the exam question, the imperative, I think that over the last 2 years, a few things have happened. One, COVID has happened, and it's really accelerated the focus on all things ESG related. 2, and pretty instrumentally, the IPCC, so the International Panel for Climate Change, released their 6th assessment report, which, to someone's question, we're no longer arguing the what, we're arguing the how and what needs to be done. So there's been a huge acceleration globally so far as the need to actually address climate change, which has been a significant shift in the dialogue. And then really for this audience in Australia, what we're seeing, the boards are being held personally accountable for the quality of the disclosures that they're giving to the market. So they're now asking exec teams, not only, what is our impact on the climate, but also what is the impact of the climate change on us. And it's a complex, fast-moving area, and I think we all do need to, keep informed, because the bar is being lifted higher and higher each day, so far as what is being expected of our corporations. And there's also value at stake here. There's not only risk, but there is opportunity. And so, what we're saying is, if you are able to, get your internal ducks in a row and actually start taking a leadership position, there is actually value on the table for your businesses as well. So it's definitely a fascinating space to be playing in. I think from my career, I've always been, from an operationalization perspective, already been working on how does my business impact climate, so packaging, decarbonisation, etc. But I've seen a significant shift in the dialogue now with clients actually really trying to quantify the impact of climate change on the business and prepare accordingly.
So with the climate imperative, what do you think is the connection to gender? Because of course we're here with Chief Executive Women. How do you think gender as a, it's one part of diversity, it's not the only part of diversity. How do you think gender fits into this puzzle?
Well, I mean, gender obviously fits into the whole ESG puzzle. And, what we've seen, we actually released a report regarding the frequency of CEO and senior departures as a result of transgressions on the S and the G specifically. And, there's a number of very salient examples on that. And, I think that has never been more front of mind. The gender part of ESG has never been more front of mind than it is at the moment. And, I think many of us would say about time too. I think as women in business, why is it important to us? I think, we're really important and instrumental in driving the change and having the right dialogue. And there's been, numerous studies about the importance of ESG and of women in actually activating and changing the dialogue in organisations. So I think we all do have a responsibility to really inform ourselves and drive the dialogue in our sphere of influence wherever we are. It is important, yes.
Absolutely. I think I read some McKinsey research recently too, which was pointing out that we've got a real skills shortage of women working in the industries that society needs to tackle the climate change crisis. So there's also a skills part to it. There's all sorts of different dimensions to this very sort of interesting issue. So we've seen some, big changes in the sort of legislative policy landscape in recent years, no more so than recently Europe set out some requirements for directors, who could be personally held liable if they don't deal with their not only their environmental but their human rights obligations. So do you want to just talk us through, from your perspective, given this changing, shifting context, when the rubber hits the road and somebody says to you, I want you to go and talk to this client about ESG, where do you even start with that, Kate?
A good question. Well, I think, that's one of the reasons why there is this alphabet soup, because what we're seeing is there's been this proliferation of standards and governing bodies over the last few years that has really made it hard for companies to sort of understand what the standard is that they need to be complying with. And so we've seen with the establishment of the ISSB in November last year that there will be a global baselining so far as what standards are needing to.
You have to put us out of our misery, Kate. You can't drop in an acronym like ISSB or whatever and expect to live that one down.
Sorry, I want to get the acronym quite right, but it's a new board under another acronym, the IFRS, which is purely tasked with standardising the disclosures that organisations need to be reporting against. So there used to be this task force for financial related climate disclosures, and that's now slotting in underneath this new group that have been formed that will be finally articulating what the minimum expectations are so far as disclosures. But coming back to your original question, which was not about disclosures, but it was about the evolution of this. So what we're also seeing is that in some jurisdictions, the reporting is mandated. And to your point, it's directors are personally liable. In Australia, that's not the case currently. It's not mandatory reporting, but we're seeing a huge increase in the number of ASX organisations that are voluntary reporting against the standards that are currently in place. And we're expecting that it will be mandated shortly. But it's important, it's not only just about a compliance reporting exercise, it's to one of the members' questions, it's actually about what you do about it. And so that's when the shareholder expectations, your customers' expectations really come to the fore. So it's not just disclosing what your risks and opportunities are, but it's actually proving that you've got action against what you're actually trying to achieve. So we're seeing the say yes to climate vote pressure really starting to increase for our clients. They're getting, you know, lots of lobbying by various interested parties along the way. So I think that the key point is in Australia, the pressure is increasing, and it's increasing on the private sector exponentially because at this stage there hasn't been a strong direction from the government. So in Australia, we really need the private sector to be leading the change, and again, there's value at stake here. There's benefit that comes with leadership across the ESG continuum.
Thank you. And so, what are some of the different ranges of positions or stances? You know, we all hear about board setting tone at the top. What's the range from? You know, is it sort of ticker box to what's the other extreme of ticker box?
Yeah, so I think what we're, you know, if you talk about levels of maturity so far as ESG ambition and outcome, it is still a spectrum. But that being said, what leadership was, you know, a year ago, you know, there's a lot of fast followers in this space. So, you know, the lower maturity would be, you know, seeing this as a governance reporting priority and going in through the corporate governance type mechanisms. What leadership looks like is really linking your ESG ambition to your purpose and making conscious decisions about where do you want to lead versus where do you want to follow, and taking into consideration both sides of the coin. So it's not only the impact of your business on the climate, but it's the impact of the climate on your business, and really looking at that all holistically and considering what needs to change in your business given those elements in order to achieve your purpose.
That's a really interesting example, a really interesting way of describing it. Are you seeing examples of companies who are shifting how they invest? You know, obviously they're shifting their operations, they're shifting their employee value proposition, but are you seeing shifts in investments as well?
Yeah, so I think that if you look like domestically, yes, but if you actually look for inspiration globally, particularly in Europe, you can see some really good examples of how organizations have actually changed the way that they do corporate planning, the way that they do capital allocation, so that they're ensuring they're directing capital to sustainability initiatives that may not have the same ROI as other sort of BAU initiatives. So that's where we're really seeing Australian companies need to go. They need to really review how are they incorporating climate in all the strategic business decisions, and really making sure that they are moving the needle and not just sort of holding water at this point.
Fantastic. And look, the mention of different sort of financial obligations on companies also reminded me, we've got a number of people on the call from not-for-profit sector or universities, and I think it's really critical to emphasise that everything you're talking about today, I think, is equally important. You know, the Australian National University here in Canberra, where you went to your fabulous science camp, has made a huge commitment to these issues.
Yeah, I'd also build on that. I'd also say, you know, going back to my point, the imperative for the private sector to really solve this, and we've seen some pretty bold moves recently by some philanthropists in Australia, but the importance of creating partnerships between academia, industry, non-for-profits in order to really, you know, solution the unsolutioned in Australia, it's never been more important. So, you know, who are you competing with? Who are you collaborating with? How are you leveraging the industry bodies to really drive change? We're seeing some great examples, but there definitely can be more. And I think, you know, some of the initiatives like Federated Data Initiative in order to democratize climate data, as an example, is going to unlock huge value through collaboration.
That's a fantastic example. What are some of the other leading examples that you've seen in your travels, Kate?
Yeah, I think you know, I've been doing a lot of work on the food value chain. So, you know, and as we know, the Australian carbon decarbonisation strategy is still a little bit unsolutioned. So, you know, how are companies working with their supply base and de-risking innovation? So if you think about regenerative agriculture, that's got an impact on productivity, but in the long run, it's going to be really important in enabling Australia to reach our decarbonisation goals. So, what good looks like is, looking at your suppliers and actually helping them make that transition, because what we also know is the cost of a transition to a low carbon economy is going to be higher the longer we leave it. So, there's going to be a little bit of a hit in the short term in order to accelerate that transition. But boy, we'll all be way better off if we can keep it below a 2-degree world.
Absolutely. I personally don't like cooking in my everyday experience and having animals and nature die around me. So yes, I completely support you on that. We've talked a lot so far about I guess some of the environmental elements of the E and the E and the ESG. What are some of your observations on how companies are tackling human rights challenges? Like this morning or yesterday, I think it was, there was a report on the ABC about cobalt, how this basically very inhumane methods of mining in Congo is finding its way into everything from smartphones to lithium batteries. So
yeah.
How are you seeing companies, from the board, from the management, from the operational level, how are they dealing with those challenges?
Yeah, I'm sure you've got some views to add to this as well, Fiona, so I'd love to hear from you. But I think from the work that we're doing with our clients in this space, what they're really needing is visibility on their entire value chain. So they can actually see, it might not be your first tier supplier, but it might be, your fourth tier supplier that's actually involved in practices that are going to be, under the microscope, or actually just not aligned with your organization values. And so increasingly it's about that, tier 1 to N supplier visibility and being able to monitor and manage structured and unstructured data to inform your understanding of your inherent risks across your supply chain. And, that's evolving. We've seen, a voice in the US regarding imports from certain provinces, and you can only understand which of your products are at risk of those kinds of practices by understanding your entire sort of tier 1 to N supply chain. So the visibility is really, really important, and the transparency, and that's important in your planning as well as your risk management. I'm sure any views from yourself based on your experience, Fiona?
Look, it's visibility and transparency is a huge challenge. I think what's exciting, you've talked about federated data and open data sources. I think one thing we are seeing is a lot more data come online about human rights challenges, and it's a lot more standardized, it's a lot more accessible. And with the sort of introduction, at least in Australia and the UK, of modern slavery legislation requirements, we've seen the growth of companies like Fair Supply, which is an organisation that does a very data-driven approach to risk mapping. We're also seeing, people creating these new technologies that you can roll out through your worker, through your own workers, but also through the workers in your supply chain, to give people an opportunity to anonymously report grievances. So I guess it's like anything. First, you've got to set the principle and make the case, or, make the case, set the principle, have the boards take it seriously. And then people are really creative, and there's all sorts of, exactly as you said, there's all sorts of value to be created by people in coming up with creative solutions to increase that transparency and visibility across the supply chain.
Yeah. And I think just one build as well is what we're saying is not only is it important from a, supplier risk, modern slavery, human rights, but also what we're seeing is, some of the unpredictable supply shocks that we've had over the last couple of years. So, what is certain is that uncertainty will continue and it become, if not more uncertain over the forthcoming years. So, how do you actually know where your vulnerabilities are, and how do you manage them proactively? It's a fascinating place, because we're seeing people investing in spaces that have normally been a cost-cutting focus, particularly in the supply chain space.
What's an example of that, Kate?
Well, I mean, a really real example is, for years it's been, what is the minimum inventory I can possibly get away with holding, And so obviously when we've had shipping crisis, we've had pallet gate, we've had, significant strikes, etc., and the import terminals, that's caused shockwaves across supply chains. So people are actually really being prepared to run at a lot higher inventory levels and carry that extra working capital, because they've realised that lost sales actually count more than a little bit of an increase in your working capital. So that's been a huge shift, like a very subtle shift to many, but if you're in that space, it's been a significant shift in the supply chain dialogue.
Wow. Well, thank you. That's a great example. And Kate, we are, of course, I know you're not a politician, so I'm not going to ask you to be political yourself, but you have made the comment about some of the rhetoric at the moment around how we're going to solve climate change is, or sorry, not even around the how, but I think you use the words unsolutioned.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what do you mean by something being unsolutioned? What would solution look like? How do we get from where we are to where we need to be on those solutions?
Sure. And I mean, I think that there's many articles on this topic, but the Australian decarbonisation roadmap is very well understood to be unsolutioned and insufficient. And by that, there's a 15% or thereabouts of the purported reduction is based on a bet of a technology solution. That technology solution is suggested that it will be an imported technology solution. So there's it is a plan. It is not a roadmap with any substance to it. So what we're really suggesting is that that's really the role that private sector needs to drive, and actually the veracity of some of the heavy emitters decarbonisation roadmaps that actually have got clear actions and milestones are going to be super important. And I think the other thing that we're finding our clients are really struggling with is the uncertainty of carbon pricing in Australia and how that's going to influence the financial veracity of some of the projects that may be more cost effective under certain assumptions than others. And so we're strongly encouraging our clients to invest time in modelling various potential scenarios with the learnings from how carbon pricing has evolved elsewhere, in order to proactively inform some of the decisions that they're able to make now and not have to wait and muddle around in the uncertainty.
So would you be suggesting to clients that they sort of basically they start accounting for their climate as if they are being required to pay for it? Is that the sort of approach you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay.
And there's enough information out there now to be able to model some sort of high-low cases for what pricing may eventuate to be. But without that, waiting for clear direction is going to really slow down our transition, and again cost us more in the long run.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. I'm mindful, Kate, that we've got an incredible group of people on the line with us today. So we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered some of the focus on, I guess, the why, some of the regulatory context, some of the trends that you're seeing. I guess I'd be really interested to hear from you. What are some of the things that you're proudest of that you've personally been involved in the ESG space, the company or the name or the project, but just what are some of the things that you've personally been able to do as a leader that were really hard and that you felt have made a difference on these issues?
That's a really good question. Look, I think,
should be doing a job interview, shouldn't I, Kate? I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I'm a mother of 3 children, and I have to look at them in the eye and be able to feel that I'm, really trying to make the world a better place for them. And that's totally honest. So, I feel that, the work that I've done in our social impact practice, where we've, invested in pro bono activities, we have invested in, for purpose. So there's a lot of small things, for purpose catering, reduced waste, all those things, for me, that really means a lot. Supporting women in our business, that's incredibly important and, a source of great frustration, but great passion for me continually. And I'll continue to invest in that. And I think, you know, the way that we are helping, and I'm helping clients on both sides of the coin, you know, I've been working in logistics and supply chain for a very long time, and the packaging space, you know, I think I'm proud of Australian industry in some sectors, you know, in the lack of guidance, the Australian Packaging Covenant organisation became a thing and has really driven a lot of change in Australia. So I'm proud of the work that I'm doing. There's definitely more to be done, but I feel I can look at my children in the eye over dinner and say I'm doing everything I can.
Fantastic. And so you should be able to. So thank you very much, Kate.
So I think,
I wondered if we have any questions from our remarkable group of women that I can see all assembled on the screen. Some of you I know, many of you I don't know. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask Kate? I'm also happy to ask questions. I think we can probably hit Deirdre up for a few questions if we ask nicely. Mariana O'Gorman, did you want to ask us a question?
Yeah, hi, Kate. I was interested in what you're advising clients about accounting for carbon costs already, as if there already was a price. I guess kind of what I'm seeing in the work that I do is that there is a shadow carbon price already operating in terms of the fact that it's hard to attract staff if you are seen in, you know, not to be quite climate conscious. Financiers, investors, it's getting harder to attract that. So there already is a shadow carbon cost associated with business that's operating in Australia, like quite apart from what the federal government does or doesn't do. How are your businesses accounting for that, or how are you advising them to account for that?
Yeah, I think so. If the question is how are we advising businesses to account for the shadow carbon? Yeah, I think it's so the key point that we're trying to encourage our clients is don't wait for certainty. You know, model for sensitivity. And so, you know, for instance, some of the carbon sequestration projects may or may not stand up because of assumptions about long run carbon pricing. And so we're really trying to encourage our clients not to wait for not to wait for certainty, but start actually planning and making decisions in the short term, and actually making sure that those decisions hold true regardless of the climate futures that transpire, right? Because there's transitional risk that'll impact the implicit carbon pricing in that shadow market.
And nowhere is that more true, I guess, than when you're looking at investing in a new business offering. You know, you think you're getting a good deal? Are you really when you factor in the scenario that in 5 years' time you might be paying for the carbon?
Yeah.
So yeah, Mariana, thank you. That's a great discussion point. I can see Anna Quillinen has her hand up. Anna.
Hi, Kate. Thank you for a great discussion. I'm also a chemical engineer, so it's lovely to meet.
Oh, I love chemical engineers.
Really nice. Also working in ESG in the E part in energy, which is wonderful and fulfilling. I think it's amazing. I work for an international company, and I guess what I'm finding is actually what I struggle with is this idea that you know, we have to wait for the solutions to come. I actually think we've actually got most of the solutions already, and particularly in Australia, we've got the natural resource to achieve our net zero carbon quite effectively. Like you say, it takes that level of private sector and to make the moves. But, you know, working for a company based out of Europe, we get a lot of experience out of there. They're so much further ahead, so much more advanced than we are here in this country. So do you look, I guess, to other countries around the world for inspiration and you know, leadership for your clients here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so two reactions to that. Firstly, you know, kudos to you for being a chemical engineer, but the truth. So actually, I was on a conversation with the head of climate at Unilever last night, and just trying to really get under the hood as to, you know, how come they've managed to do so much and still maintain leadership in that space. You know, Patagonia, Unilever, IKEA are the darlings of all things sustainability, and you know, there's a lot of material on them, but you know, categorically, everybody in there, 25% of everybody's incentive payment is linked to the organisation achieving their sustainability goals.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a CEO mandate, you know, so what more, you know, it needs to be top down. And I know transformation is a dirty word, but you talk to, you know, the head of sustainability at IKEA, and they did approach it with a transformation mindset, because it's not about just, you know, ESG as a satellite, you know, governance organisation. It's actually embedding ESG considerations across all business decisions. You know, how do you source? How do you manage your suppliers? You know, how do you manage all your stakeholders, be it shareholders, customers, internal, external? It is a transformation, but we need to come up with a better word, because transformation is a dirty word.
I agree. Thanks, Kate.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much, Anna. Anna, I'd be interested to ask you if I could question, if I might.
Sure.
What are you seeing from Europe that you think is really exciting that we need here in Australia?
Well, I just think there's a lot of innovation, and I'm particularly working in energy and taking precincts to net zero. So, you know, simple things like heating and cooling are our biggest draw of energy consumption in a city or a university, and optimizing that. There's really simple ways to do it, but in Australia we haven't integrated that technology here. It is, as Kate will say, it's a transformation. It's big infrastructure. It requires us digging up roads and things like that. But, you know, massive, you know, 30% reduction in energy. And, you know, when we're trying to decarbonise, we need to not only green our energy source, but we've got to reduce the amount of energy we use. And I think in Australia, we've always had so much energy available to us that we haven't really ever been so concerned about, you know, optimizing it. So this is a real shift for us, I think, and that's probably one of the big things I see. That's super exciting. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it's good that there's hope out there, even if some days in Australia it feels like our politicians have their heads in the sand.
I think if we could get rid of the politicians, we'd be right. We'd be able to do it ourselves.
Very more.
Now I can see that our Chief Executive Women CEO Susan Metcalf has her hand up. Susan, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona, and good afternoon to everybody. Lovely to see you all online. It's always such a pleasure to be here with you. I have to ask the question that I have to ask as CEO at Chief Executive Women. Kate, what are you seeing from organisations, and I think I might sadly know the answer to this, but I hope you can enlighten me. How are they thinking about this, particularly in relation to gender? Because we know that if the industries of the future, and also through the sustainability piece, is not done well with a very clear and specific focus on the impact on women, a lot of the current gender gaps that we currently have will be worse, because we don't have enough women in the STEM fields, and we don't have enough coming through in these fields. And without focused and quite deliberate attention to that gendered impact, it may well get worse for women. So the question, I guess, is, are we seeing any deliberate consideration of that? And if we're not, what can we do about it?
Well, that's a big question, Susan. I'd like to get your perspectives on that one. Impact of women in regards to the impact of climate change on women's and their careers.
You know, many of the roles that women currently have are going to be more impacted than some of the others. Many of the places in the world where women are predominant or in lower levels of society are going to be more heavily impacted. So across all dimensions, I think there is potential for women to be more significantly impacted. But as you say, it's a big question. So if you want to address
it's a really interesting one. I think you know, the fascinating thing, when you talk to people in Europe, they are like, we're going to keep it to a 1.5 degree world. Like, it's given, we're fine, everything's going to be fine. When you actually talk to clients in Australia, everyone is like, oh, like we're heading towards at the best a 4.4 degree world. I mean, obviously this is by 2100, but I think, to your point, perhaps more needs to be done to articulate what those worlds actually look like, you know, and what the, you know, perhaps that's what, because it's not only about the impact of, you know, on the flora and fauna and agriculture and where we live, but it is actually an impact on society and migration and urbanization and roles and responsibilities. And, you know, to your point, I haven't seen a huge amount of material on the broader social impacts of climate change. I've seen a lot on the physical, be it acute and transitional, acute or chronic, but yeah, the broader social impacts perhaps need to be articulated more clearly or discussed openly.
And perhaps the extension of that too is that many of the emerging industries that come with that decarbonisation and green industries are in fields where women are currently underrepresented.
Yeah.
So if those industries continue to grow exponentially, then women will get left further behind.
Employment of the future is going to be biased towards, that's totally fair.
Yeah.
So clearly we need more chemical engineers. Fiona, I'm sure you've got it.
I think that's pretty much the solution. Thank you, Kate, and I'm sure Anna Quillinan would agree with you on that, and any other STEM members in the group. Deirdre, I can see you've got a question.
Yes, thank you both for such a fantastic discussion. Kate, I was just wondering if in this unsolutioned world, you could talk us through a little bit more about how you're advising our clients to go about structuring their pathway to net zero, and how do they set challenges and targets, and particularly how do they manage scope 3 emissions?
Got it. So I'm sure that, and I'd love to hear other members' conversations or Connect members. I'm sure there's got some experts here on the decarbonisation pathways, etc. But we're seeing a huge amount of progress in that space, and from a year ago, the number of companies in Australia that have actually set scope 3 targets, it is a step change, right? So there is a lot of movement in this space in Australia. We are still behind the rest of the world, guaranteed, but there's a lot of movement. I think what scope 3 is really hard for many of our clients. Scope 1 or 2, is solution. Scope 3 is really hard, and particularly in Australia, given the supply chains. So I think, we're still navigating that through with many of our clients, but having, a really good understanding, obviously, of your sources of emissions at a category supplier level, etc., is front and center of that. Working with your suppliers and your customers, there's some great examples across industries as to, really working with your across your value chain to reduce your scope 3 emissions. So I think it is still a little bit of, it's still very tough for many of our clients. So, the margin abatement cost curves and really education is really important for the clients, for the exec teams. The justification of, we'll do this, we'll unlock value, we'll be able to fund further abatement, but there's still going to be a cost that's going to be incurred. But, let's incur it now, not later. I think the comment from Anna about, refrigeration in Australia, that's an extraordinary risk for us. And, I know a number of clients have not been able to stand up projects yet in that space in order to reduce their emissions. So, lots of work needs to be done in that, in the decarbonisation journey, and actually really solutioning the pathway to scope 3 net zero.
Thank you.
On this scope 1, 2 and 3, just in case there's anyone who hasn't spent a lot of time getting across this sort of terminology. So Kate, I'm probably going to mangle this, but scope 1 is basically your emissions from your immediate activities. Scope 2 is those of your, remind me what scope 2 again, your employers and...
Yeah, it's within your network.
Within your network. And then scope 3 is, for example, if you're shipping off
Correct.
coal to another country and then it's being used to power a power plant, then that's your scope 3 emissions. Okay, thank you. Look, I might pick up on the gender question, if I might, Susan, just to take it back to that topic for a moment. I'm sad to hear, Kate, that you're not seeing perhaps such a strong uptake on the gender side of this equation, and I think it raises a really interesting question around how do we change that. We know climate, environmental issues kind of have that architecture that's grown up over the last 20 years around, there's a target, a specific target, it's measurable, it's got a scientific, it's got the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of, bazillions of scientists walking around arguing and then agreeing on what the situation is. It really feels like we don't have any sort of like equivalent architecture that would get us all to a similar level of agreement on what the shared problem is on gender, let alone what the shared solutions are. So maybe in the gender world, we need to be looking at the climate world and thinking about what are the key pieces of infrastructure that are in place there, and how could we do that in relation to gender?
Yeah.
So that's sorry, that's probably a bit more of a statement than a question. Just also to draw everyone's attention to Sam Mostyn, the president of Chief Executive Women, Nicola Forrest, who's the co-chair of Minderoo Foundation where I work, June Oscar, Julie Bishop, and a number of other leading Australian women have got a current political call out through Women for Progress at the moment. And that's covering a range of asks, at least of the government. I know we're talking about business responsibility, but I still think governments have an obligation to sort of set the framework that then enables business to take action. Alison, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, I have. I couldn't resist. Sorry.
Did I say the G word?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on two things. One is the idea of, rather than looking at what structures there are in the climate change space and seeing how they could be adapted, for want of a better word, into the gender space, what I would be interested in understanding is what structures there are within the climate space to address gender inequality, because it specifically around also what has come about through the ESG infrastructure and frameworks, and how that's aligned with gender equality, just not because of gender equality for gender equality's sake, but in terms of understanding how inclusive and participatory processes and institutions and infrastructure will actually generate better results. So in that sense, if we really want to achieve those climate change solutions, how are we ensuring that the infrastructure for achieving those solutions is inclusive and integrative of gender and of women and their leadership in this space? And secondly, I just also wanted to flag that we're Women for Progress that you mentioned, Fiona, which is a fabulous group, and several of CEW's members are on that group. So it's a case of many voices amplifying the issues. But I just also wanted to do a quick flag that Chief Executive Women is also releasing its policy priorities for the federal election. And so that will be coming your way. And in fact, I think it's already up on the Connect hub. So we'd really encourage you to have a look at those policy priorities, a lot of them which align very closely with the Women for Progress priorities. But interestingly, we do also raise this issue of women's leadership and women's participation in the sectors that are involved in the solutions for climate change as a need in the upcoming federal elections. So we would encourage you to see that. And also, if you are having discussions with any parliamentarians or candidates, please do share CEW's policy priorities as you see fit.
Fantastic. And in case it helps, the Australian government did sign up to something called Equal by 30, which is about increasing gender representation in climate responses, and whether or not anything serious is happening with that. Maybe that's another good question to ask any elected representatives you might get to hang out with. Now, Deirdre, we're at time, unfortunately. So I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you to all of our questioners and Kate. And Kate, thank you so much. And
thank you.
Pass the proverbial baton over to you, Deirdre.
Yes, thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Kate. I'm sure everybody will agree that it really has been a very stimulating session. And Kate, I think you've shone a light on so many of the issues that you and your clients are working on and that are really issues for all of us. So thank you very, very much. Would everybody like to go off mute and thank our speakers in the usual way?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Now, Amanda and the team at CEW have asked me to let you know that they are already planning some more CEW Connect events on this topic. It's obviously a really important topic, and so please keep your eyes out for those events. And also, if I can plug the CEW scholarships again, please look out for the CEW and ANZ Sustainability Scholarship. Consider applying yourself or recommending that a valued colleague apply. Thank you again to Fiona and Kate and to Amanda and the CEW team for all their hard work in bringing today's event together, and to you especially for taking time to join us. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Deirdre. That was really lovely. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, I think it was a terrific event, and I think Kate and Fiona are just such stars. It's wonderful for the CEW Connect community to be able to see them. So thank you for inviting me to participate and to plug the scholarship.
Absolutely. And yeah, we look forward to, well, sorry, I'm speaking on behalf of Amanda. I've got to let this go, Amanda.
No, I'm very happy for the hands at the moment. But no, thank you. It was really nicely done as well. I thought the info, yeah. And the conversation flowed really nicely from that. So, as you say, plenty more to discuss as well, hopefully in the future.
Fantastic. Well, have a lovely evening.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.